Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in. We're incredibly excited to continue our TYCon webinar program. Just as a quick recap, every month we feature a live webinar bringing in highly ambitious and successful members of our TYCon community to discuss a broad range of topics from culture. Last month we had politics, and this month we have some professional spaces, consulting spaces. Our goal with the series generally is just to create a space where students and young professionals can hear from their peers with similar backgrounds and get advice on, real world insights. Particularly, we're focusing on topics that are going beyond the classroom and unique to this experience of Chinese Americans. Before we dive in, I'd like to briefly introduce our speakers and moderators, who are coincidentally also our webinar team. I can go ahead and start. My name is Tatiana Nazimov. I'm acting as the Director of Programs for TYCon. I'm a junior at Princeton studying public and international affairs, and I'll be helping to moderate today's discussion.
Hello, everyone. My name is Raymond Zhao. I'm currently the Southern California Regional Lead for TYCon and also a webinar team member. I'm currently a sophomore at UCI studying electrical engineering. And our final member today couldn't make it, unfortunately. So I'm so sorry to Remy. And finally, our special guests for today are Susan Zhao and Richie Lo. And we're so excited to have you here today. And if you don't mind, quickly introducing yourselves.
Susan, you want to go first?
Yeah, I can go first. Hello, everyone. My name is Susan. I currently work at McKinsey in the life sciences practice. My background is in biology and economics, and I also have done a few years of research before I pivoted into consulting. I'm more willing to talk about that later on in the seminar. Very excited to be here and very excited for this seminar.
Hey, everybody. My name is Richie Liu. I am a senior engagement manager at McKinsey, our New York office. Also work heavily in our life sciences practice and our market access division. So I work very closely with Susan, actually. I graduated about 8 years now from University of Pennsylvania, undergrad degree in business, and have been doing consulting since then in New York City. So yeah, excited to be here and can't wait to talk to you all.
So the goal for today's webinar is not just to highlight our two talented members of our Gen 2 community, but it's also to showcase a perfect example of one Gen 2 helping another.
Right. So with that being said, I can go ahead and give a brief overview of our outline today. Raymond and I will be leading a structured questioning and programming for the next 15 or 20 minutes. We're going to go over a quick consulting 101, Susan and Richie's educational backgrounds, a day in the life, and obviously it's recruiting season. I know that's why a lot of you joined today. Here's some tips and tricks. And then to close off, we'll talk about their story meeting each other through TYCon and what that relationship has been like since. And at the end, we will leave time for Q&A. So you guys, from the audience, you guys feel free to ask Richie and Susan questions that you may have. So without further ado, I think we can go ahead and get started. First, before we do any of the consulting overviews, I would love to hear about both of your guys' educational backgrounds, what campus organizations you maybe were a part of. Did you always know you wanted to go into consulting? Yeah, what were your paths like into the field?
I can go first. I went to undergrad at New York University. I studied biology and economics. And during my undergrad, I've always had the thought of being in the intersection of business and science. So my internship at the time involved one in a private equity firm and one at a pharma startup. And on the side, I have always been very interested in the Asian community. So I was part of the Japanese Culture Association and also the Asian American Medical Student Association, the pre-med chapter. So that was me during undergrad. And then I figured that I wanted to delve deeper into the sciences. So I joined my master's program at Columbia University. I studied biotechnology. And post my master's program, I did 3 years of research at Columbia where I was studying cardiac diseases and muscular diseases, which were all extremely fun. But I started to realize that I wanted to be at a point of life science where I'm closer to where I see the impact of my work. Although I do really enjoy the science, I do feel a little distant from the basic science to where the science actually applies. And because I've always had this thought of consulting at the back of my mind and I've done case competitions before, I figured that it was a good time for me to pivot. So I started looking for opportunities and eventually ended up where I am today. That is kind of my journey to consulting. Richie, I know you have a little bit of a different journey.
Yeah, slightly different journey. So as I mentioned, I was undergrad at the University of Pennsylvania where I studied business and I majored in finance, marketing, and strategic management. For me, it was different. I think I always as a business undergrad, I always knew that I kind of wanted to do something involved in consulting. So I think quite early on, I knew this is the path I wanted to take. And so my experience at school was actually one that was very centered around prepping myself for a career in consulting. So doing a lot of case competitions, being a part of a consulting club, things like that. And also being part of like the Wharton China Business Society. So I think for me, those interests kind of intersected well across like my extracurriculars that I did at school. And I think that also helped prepare me a lot for this career in consulting. I mean, case competitions, and we'll talk more about this, but like case competitions I thought were a great way for me to like practice kind of and learn how to think and problem solve. Whereas like consulting clubs are a great way for me to understand like what was actually like being a part of a team and going through a consulting engagement. And then, yeah, I think for me, that's kind of the path I took. And then upon graduation, I started actually at another consulting firm at Deloitte as a generalist. And for there, again, when I first joined consulting, the goal for me was really to be able to experience a lot of different industries and have the ability to work in like farm and agriculture retail. And then over time, I just realized I think the people I enjoyed working with the most were the ones in life sciences. And so I ended up kind of pivoting and really focusing on that when I made that switch over to McKinsey.
Awesome. Thank you. I think it's interesting to have like both of your stories because it shows that there really isn't one path. Obviously, Susan, you focused a lot more on research, and Richie, you always knew that I think you wanted to do consulting. So a lot of your extracurriculars aligned with it in college. I am curious about if you guys could share a little more about, you both seem to have done case competitions though. Like when in your careers, I guess, are you guys doing this? And I think also for the audience, it would be helpful, like depending on different stages in life, what we should be thinking about. Like for me, I'm a junior in college, but maybe if some of the people in high school or first or second year in college, later in the career, does it change how they should approach like preparation?
Yeah. I mean, case competitions, the first case competition I ever did was freshman year in college. I would say like that definitely tends to be a little bit early, but I think it was a good experience as well to do, mostly just to expose me to like what these things were, right? Like what were, and depending on like what college and what school you go to, I'm sure you'll see the opportunity to participate in case competitions all the time. What I recommend, right, and think through is that if you like case competitions are a great way to like understand if consulting is a career that is something that you would actually enjoy, right? Because, like, to be fair, right, case competitions in the moment are not the most enjoyable things. They're quite intense. There's a lot of pressure. There's stress, right? But if you eventually looking back, enjoy the experience and like enjoy the work that you're doing, which is cracking a problem with the team, eventually presenting it to a panel of judges, and you find that actually something that's like actually enjoyable, then like it's actually a good litmus test to think that consulting might actually be a good opportunity for you, right? I would say like as a freshman or as a sophomore, I mean, get involved if you want to, right? Try it out, find some friends and do it, right? Without any pressure. And then I think if you want to like get more involved, I think most universities have opportunities to compete in more case competitions as you get more like senior, right? As a junior, as a senior, you can do more case competitions. Some schools, I know, like for example, like University of Pennsylvania, we have an international case team that actually goes and actually sends us out to schools around the world to compete. Now, like that's kind of extreme end of it, but I think there is always that opportunity. And the best part about case competitions too is that there's no real like barrier to join, right? A consulting club, you need to recruit, you need to get in to get that experience. With a case competition, anyone can sign up with a group of friends and a team. And I think, and if you enjoy it, like do it, right? It's a great way to get experience. It's also obviously when you do eventually like recruit, if you want to recruit for consulting, it's a thing that for sure looks good on your resume as well.
So I think for the audience, I think the next thing we should talk about is the daily life of a consultant. I'm sure I study electrical engineering, so that's not super related to consulting. I've always had this question in my mind, like, what do consultants do? So I think both of you should explain a little bit of your daily schedule, like what you do on a day-to-day basis.
Maybe Susan, you take this one because you're talking about the life of more of a associate partner.
Yeah, for sure. My life compared to Richie can be a little different. So for me, my day of life usually starts with a check-in of the day with my team to align on what is the priority of today, what is the priority of this week, what do we want to get done. And then there would usually be multiple what we call problem-solving sessions at McKinsey, where we meet in groups to discuss about different topics that we want to problem solve. And usually based on the problem solving sessions, we would have the kind of sequential tasks that we need to complete, either if it's building a model or if it's making more pages or if it's kind of to do more thinking on a specific topic. And the day usually kind of is followed with a few of these meetings with our individual work that you're leading on your work stream in between. And towards the end of the day, depending on how far away you came to today's goal, we would do a checkout, and that is usually a wrap up the day. That's kind of the day-to-day life. When it comes to kind of a project, I know like Richie can talk more, but usually we start with a little kickoff, and then you work towards a deliverable with different days having different timings, and you usually end at the end of your staffing or the end of the project. So that's kind of a simple example of a day. I'll let Richie talk more about his day from a more kind of leadership perspective.
Yeah, I mean, maybe taking a step back, right? And I don't know what everyone's like understanding of consulting as an industry is, right? Like ultimately as consultants, what we do is that a company hires us because they have a problem that they themselves either don't know how to solve or do not have the ability or capacity to solve. And they hire us to do that, right? And so we all come in as a team together, right? With an analyst like Susan, an engagement manager, and a partner to kind of solve that problem over a course of 6 to 8 weeks, right? Whether that problem, for example, we do a lot of problem solving around like our client wants to launch a new drug into the market, right? How do they do that? What's the best way to do that? Or, for example, the White House has published new laws and regulations on drug pricing. And so what does that actually mean for our clients, for our companies, and like how does that change their strategy when it comes to pricing medication and getting patients medication that they need, right? So those are some problems that like we solve, obviously, but like consultants work across a variety of different industries. So from a leadership perspective, right, as someone who kind of is that senior engagement manager coming up to an associate partner, my time is split between one, building out relationships with clients, working with them to kind of understand, right, what are the things that are keeping them up at night tonight so that we can figure out, like, is there a way that I can help them, right? Because at the end of the day, consulting is exactly that. It's consulting, right? It's consulting someone when they have something that's keeping them up at night or something they can't solve, right? And then I work with them to see, is this something that we can make an impact on and help them with? In which case we can like do a project for them. I can bring in a team of people like Susan to help them solve that. That's like half my day. The other half obviously is like working on existing projects with my teams to help solve problems that are already given to us, right? And so as Susan mentioned during the day, right, she has problem solving sessions with her team. And so I will sometimes join those problem solving sessions, given that I obviously have had more experience in the industry with whatever topics that we're talking about and help them try to solve any questions or roadblocks they have throughout the project to like get to their final answer and final deliverable, right? And I'll be doing that with one or two teams during my day. And then of course, right, like we'll have meetings with clients where we will either tell them like what is our kind of current hypothesis and what the answer is, or if we're later in the project, like show them what our recommendation is to kind of the question that they had, the problem that they had. Beyond that, right, I think like obviously at McKinsey, that's most of our life is doing that. But obviously we also do a lot of other just general knowledge development and thinking, right? So even if I don't have a client, I'm also thinking through a lot of different topics in the pharma space on like what is our latest perspective, right? For example, recently, like if you guys are all familiar with like Ozempic and like GLP-1s, right? Like what is some interesting stuff that we think about that how is this going to impact and change the pharma industry that we can have an interesting perspective to go to our clients and our CEOs because they themselves don't have the time to think about these problems. Right. And so we'll also do a lot of that thinking as well. And so, yeah, I think it's the great part about this job is that every day is different. And even then, every few months, it's like a new job, right? Because you are going to different clients, starting a different project. You actually work with different teams as well, right? The team that I work with today is going to be different with the team I work with in a few weeks. And so it's always changing. And that's kind of what makes it so like energizing for me.
Yeah. And I'm curious about A, like the fact that it's always changing, and B, maybe these like problem solving sessions. What are some skills that you feel like are very valuable in the consulting space or that maybe you guys had to work on as you like as you got there and as you're working? Maybe for Susan, it's more relevant because I know you're like been there more recently this past year. Are there any skills that you think you really had to work on or like prioritize?
Well, I think one skill that's quite important that I've came to the realization in consulting is definitely kind of how you structure your problem. And it it's also kind of to respect the people's time who are doing the problem solving for you. So I think it's a great skill to have if you're able to dissect a problem, really break it down and figure out what exactly needs to be resolved and then discuss it with the leaders or with your team members in order to come to a conclusion. And I think that process of like dissecting a problem and then coming up with some hypothesis and then structuring it in a way that is easy to communicate across different teams is a skill that I am still continually working on and is a skill that I think is quite valuable for consultants. So that's kind of one thing. And I guess the other thing in consulting is usually in a problem solving session, the room is filled with a lot of people who are very loud. And I'm not saying that in a bad way. It's more like people all want to express something. So it's also like a skill that you would want to work on, which is to be able to interrupt in a conversation and insert your opinions into that problem solving because we want to get everyone's thought together. And if you don't have the opportunity to speak, then your thoughts or your inputs will not be put in. So these are kind of my two thoughts on this. Richie, let me know what you think.
No, yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense, right? I think especially within like what really prepares you for consulting is being able to structure how you solve a problem, right? And depending on how big the problem is. And I think the way I like to think about how a consulting project runs is it's just a set of different problems, right? Depending on the level you're at, right? So Susan, as an analyst, the problem that she's solving is one small piece of the bigger question, right? Around the problem that she's solving is around like, how does she need to model something or what is specific like insight from this specific piece of research, right? And then her manager is solving the greater problem of like the actual problem from the project, right? We were hired to solve this specific question and all the things that Susan's doing and her other team members are doing, how do they all ladder up to like give us the final answer on that project? Now, for me, the problem I'm solving is beyond that, right? It's more about like it's like my specific client that's like who want this project done. Like, what is their end all objective, right? Is it specifically this question that they're asking, or is there some more other like read between the lines type concerns and questions that they have, and like how can I help best solve that for them? And then obviously as you get more and more senior, as you become like a senior partner, then you're like solving the problems of like the CEO, right, of a company, right? And so, but no matter what step you are, you have to be able to like structure it out, right? Structure it from like a first principles basis, and then also be able to communicate it in an organized way, right? If you answer the question, you still can't properly communicate it in a structured and organized way, like all that work is done for nothing anyways, right? So I think those are two important pieces and skills. And also like, and like we'll get there, right? When it comes to like recruiting for consulting, those are also the skills that we are actually looking for when it comes to the interview process.
Yeah, that's a perfect transition. I was just going to ask, like as an engagement manager, what kind of skills or experiences are you guys looking for when you talk to applicants? I know Susan mentioned being like assertive, but also like being able to really problem solve. If you guys could expand more on that.
Yeah, I can probably talk about like exactly what we're looking for, and then maybe Susan, you say like you can talk about like how you prep.
I prep,
You read this recently.
Yeah.
But I think for right when it comes to the recruiting process for consulting, right? There's like if you think about there's like two phases, right? There's a phase around the resume, and then there's a phase around the interview. So with the resume, I think what we're really looking for are a few things, right? One is around leadership experience, being able to be the leader and owner and driving impactful efforts, whether that's within a student organization or a sports team or whatever, right? It can come from a variety of different places. The second thing is we look for what we're calling, what I'll call entrepreneurship. That doesn't mean that you need to like start your own company, but what we're looking for is taking initiative and proactivity and starting something, right? Whether it's a new club or whether it's a new, or like even within a club, like a new committee in the club or something. But like the ability to actually like start something from scratch is something that we also look for. And obviously the more impactful that is, the better, obviously. And then the third thing I'd say we're looking for obviously is like academic excellence. At the end of the day, consulting, it's like the asset at a consulting firm are like the brains of the people, right? So like we do want to look for academic excellence, like high GPAs, strong showing in academics. And then lastly, I would say is a like interest, like a demonstrated interest in consulting, right? So showing us that like this is actually a career that you're interested in pursuing. And this can be done through doing case competitions, being part of consulting clubs, all that stuff that like shows a lot of that, right? And also breeds the skills that we look for. The interview side, it's different, right? Because the interview side, now that you've got the interview, what we look for a lot is around when, and obviously consulting is known for the case interviews, right? And so with the case interviews, which is basically like a mini case competition or a mini consulting project, right? What we're looking for are a few things, right? One is, I think what we talked about plenty of times already, right? Being able to structure a problem out. And I just think having structured thinking overall, right? Whether it's structuring the problem out, whether it's structuring out your answer, everything needs to be very like clear cut, right? I mean, if you even think about like the way that I'm explaining this answer right now is very structured. I think number two, right, what we're looking for is like critical thinking, right? The ability to be faced with a problem or a topic that you have no understanding of, right? And no background in, and still be able to think through it and like break it down to its like basic first principles and like come up with an interesting answer to it. And then I think lastly, what's important obviously is also some quantitative rigor, right? There will be a portion of the case interview that is a math piece. So being able to kind of be quick with math. But I think, again, going back to like being able to structure and solve the math problem in an organized, structured way is very important. And then lastly, I would say is like being able to like synthesize, right? A lot of times in the case interviews, like you're going through it all and you're like coming up with the answer, but you don't actually end up taking it back into the context of what is the problem you're trying to solve, right? It's something that's very common where an interviewer or interviewee like answers a very difficult math question, gets the right number, but then like doesn't put that number to context. Like, is it a good number? Is it a bad number? What does the number mean? Right. So I think those are some things that we're really looking for. Maybe, I don't know, Susan, if you want to like talk, like you just gone through this like a year ago. So if you want to like talk about how you prep for it.
Right. Yeah, no, I definitely agree with everything Richie just said. These are definitely like very important factors you should keep in your mind while you're preparing for this process. And I think like from a recruiting perspective, kind of how you get to different stages of recruiting, I think obviously first is you need to get to that, getting the interview stage. And the preparation leading up to that stage is obviously you need to make sure your resume is looking very well. But also I think when it comes to recruiting, kind of networking is also a big part of this process. So reaching out to whomever you think has the knowledge of the industry and really trying to talk to them and learn more about the industry so that you either hear about more opportunity or you get more information like what Richie just said, which are on kind of the insights of what consulting firms are looking for. And then making sure that for your resume, you go through that with people who are experienced in the field and tailor it to either a specific company or specific industry you're recruiting for. And then once you get to that interview stage, I agree with whatever Richie just said, which is to be able to practice that structured thinking when it comes to not only just your cases, but also the way you answer your behavioral questions. I think when it comes to an interview, the interviewer is looking for, I think, two things, or like three things actually. One is, are you able to communicate the message you want to communicate? Two is, are you able to structure it in a way that is easy to understand? And three is, are you able to give something beyond what is just being asked? So really focusing on delivering these three criteria when answering each questions during the interview, I think is a great starting point to prep. And then for cases, it's really just you need to practice as much as possible. Obviously, you don't need to do like 100 cases, but I say like minimum 20 case. For me, I did like 60 cases, which is on like the more side of prepping, but don't come into an interview underprepared, because it's also not respecting your interviewer's time. And I will say the other thing is like, don't underestimate how important the behavioral questions are. With case competition, I mean, not case competition, with cases, because there's like only so many parts to it, you would be able to showcase more about you through the behavioral questions. So really like put your time in to prep for the answers for behavioral questions, and making sure you're answering in a way that is showcasing how ready you are as a consultant. For example, if a question is asking you about how do you resolve a conflict, think about that question in a way of like, what does this mean for a consultant to solve a conflict? And then really deliver the story in a way that showcases how you would be able to do that if you're on the job. I think these are kind of how I prepped. So I did prep my resume, did networking, prepped my cases, did a lot of practice, and then really delve very deep into my behavioral questions with each and every answers that I'm bringing to my interviews. So 4 things.
Yeah, definitely. I think networking is a very important part. Obviously, you have to be very competent yourself. You must have the skills. You have to be very sharp. But I feel like these days it's also about like who you know. I feel like the most valuable thing about this whole TYCon thing is the network that it provides. I feel like all of Gen 2s are very talented. They're very, very skillful in totally different industries. I feel like the fact that if someone wants to switch to a totally different industry or needs some sort of expertise, then it's very easy for Gen 2s, I think, to help each other and do that. I feel like your story with how you got your job at McKinsey and Richie helping you is very valuable. I think a lot of other Gen 2s should learn from that. So could you tell us like the whole process of like how you and Richie met through TYCon and how he like guided you through the process of getting the McKinsey job?
Yeah, of course. Should I?
Yeah, go ahead.
I can talk it. Richie can add on if I'm missing anything. Well, me and Richie, we met at the first TYCon conference in 2023, 2020.
Yeah, the one in
Yeah.
Washington. Yeah.
Yeah, the one in
BT,
Washington. And we kept in touch after that event, but at the time I wasn't like committed to doing consulting yet. But I think as time went on and I decided that it is time to pivot, I think the first thing I did was to kind of proactively reaching out to the network I have. And me and Richie met during the summer when I was recruiting, and we were kind of just chatting about consulting and recruiting. And Richie brought up that there is an opportunity at McKinsey that could be a good fit for me. So that's how I came to know about this opportunity. And obviously, Richie did later help a lot more with kind of giving me what he just gave you guys, which is kind of the characteristics or the skills that is being looked for during a consulting interview. But I would say that is kind of how we got to know each other, which is through like the initial introduction and then keeping in touch. And then reaching out if you feel like this is a good person to talk to. And Richie was very kind to be willing to share a lot of the information that he is sharing with you guys today and also shared with me in the past.
Yeah, I think that sums it up pretty well, right? I think the takeaway from this, and I think the whole reason why TYCon exists, right, is obviously to like build up everyone's network, right? And I think like ultimately, the reason why this model works and this model is successful is not because like Susan's parents also went to the same school that my parents did, right? But it's because like Susan and I met at one of these conferences or events, right? It doesn't have to be the conference, right? But there's also like there's TYCon mixers at every like major city at the moment, right? But it's the fact that like we met at one of these events, and then from there, like it wasn't from day one that Susan wanted to work at McKinsey, but it was like from there, like we became friends, and then happened to also like be in New York, right? And so like the great thing about TyCon is also builds out your like friend groups, right? And people that you know. And because Susan and I became friends as along with some other people that we met at the conference, right? Like you learn more about them, and also they're more top of mind for you. So that when Susan was talking about looking for a new job, I was like, hey, well, we're actually recruiting right now. We're actually hiring. And like obviously when it comes to recruiting, right? And for me, as someone who actually runs a part of McKinsey recruiting, like I had tons of people like asking me for referrals or coffee chats or whatever, right? And I don't have time to like talk to every one of them, but because I like actually know Susan from a personal level, from being friends with her, from like meeting her at TYCon, all that stuff, like it's someone I was more worth dedicating time and resource to helping, right? And like not only that, but like Susan, I know like you like cased with like other TYCon people, right? Like you cased like Vincent Zhao, who was also recruiting and other people, right? So like it's a full network, and that's kind of like the value of it, right? Is like you don't want to be doing this just because like you want a job or get to college or whatever, but like you do it because you want to meet people, and then you never know who one day is like looking to hire someone or is looking to get hired or whatever. And because you have this network built out, it enables you to, and like because you're all surrounded by like great, impressive people, like it's a great starting point from there, right?
Oh, sorry. Can
No,
just
go
add on
ahead.
to that. I think like TyCon is definitely a great platform, like Richie said, which is like you don't have to come in with a ulterior motive of like I want to get this out of this. I think this is a great platform where you just get to meet excellent people who are very successful in their own ways, and you become friends with them. And when you feel like there are some things that you want support with, it just comes very naturally where because you have this platform, you're able to reach out to some people who have the experience in that field. And as Richie said, like I didn't only reach out to Richie in TyCon, I did reach out to some of the other folks who are in consulting at TyCon as well. And because we're already friends and we've already met, it just was very natural for me to reach out. It didn't feel very awkward for me to do the reach out. And people were also very receptive when I kind of request for some support or some help or just asking to connect to learn more about the industry. So just
Yeah.
wanted to add that. Yeah.
Wait, no, absolutely. And with that being said, I do want to open it up to the audience for questions because I know I could obviously ask you guys a million questions, but I'd like love to give the audience an opportunity. Any questions you might have. I also saw them in the Google form. I think we can do it by if you guys just want to use like the raise hand function and we can go in order.
Or put in the chat.
Yeah, or drop it in the chat, whatever you guys are more comfortable with. Yeah, go ahead, Chase.
Hello, I'm Chase. I'm a second year at Ohio State University, and I'm majoring in computer science and engineering, which is a non-traditional path compared to the business majors that everyone's taking at Fisher here. So my question is mainly for Susan. It's like, how did you leverage your biology major to help you during recruiting season? Because I'm sure that you have different inputs that are a lot different from the traditional like business pathway. So how did you leverage that during your interviews to help express like your interest as well as your passion while interviewing?
I think there is as a benefit and disadvantage of coming from a non-business background, where the benefit is that you're able to show that you have a more scientific way of thinking that is a little bit different from everyone else. But the disadvantage is that it is a little harder to kind of persuade someone that you're actually committed to this path. And I think like when it comes to your advantage, definitely like try to frame your answers in a way that is relevant to your experience. Don't try to like make up things that you didn't do, and really answer a question with an experience that you are actually able to expand more if they ask you, and also showcase that unique kind of scientific thinking that you have. For example, if you do computer science, you're good at analytical stuff, then do make that a highlight when it comes to your interview. But then in terms of like how you address the like my commitment to consulting part, I do think it requires some effort early on, where if you have the thought of potentially pivoting into an industry where your major is not directly related with, it is good to start building some of the experiences like doing case competitions or joining consulting clubs so that there is something on your resume that can show the interest in the industry. I do think like they do value people from different backgrounds, bringing in the different skills. And especially with computer science, I think with kind of the development of all these technologies and kind of building of the AI centers and different agents, we do want people who have the knowledge of these technologies come into the firm so that they're able to actually work on relevant projects. So I wouldn't worry too much about like coming from a different major. I would maybe focusing a little bit on building more experiences that's relevant to this field.
Yeah, just to quickly add on, right? Like I think the things that we listed, right? Leadership, entrepreneurship, critical thinking, structured thinking, communication, like these are not skills that are like specific to a specific major, right? These are all skills that are demonstrated, like demonstrable by like anyone. And so that's what you want to like really be showcasing.
That's good. Thank you so much. I also had another question for Richie. I don't know if anybody else has a question, but if not, I'll ask my question. I know you mentioned that you worked at Deloitte for a year or a summer. How did you, and I know that you're working at McKinsey now. In your opinion, what is the culture at McKinsey that makes it stand out compared to like other internships as well as companies that you've worked at before? Like what made you stay at McKinsey and what made you want to continue to work for them?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think for me, like what I really having been at two different consulting companies and like seeing what really the difference is, I think what really makes McKinsey stand apart from the rest is the level of impact that we're making, right? And so what that means is like the level of problems that we're solving, I feel like at McKinsey tends to be at a much higher level and a much greater impact than what I was doing at Deloitte, right? I think the day in the life, the kind of the skills required are all the same, right? McKinsey, Deloitte. I think there's also extremely smart people at both places. I think what is unique about McKinsey is that we are usually serving CEOs and like the top, right? The leaders at our clients, right? So whether that's CEOs, whether that's like heads of state, right? Even that, right? Like we are usually, that's where we are versus at other firms. I think you're more at the like C-suite -2, -1 level. Right. And so that's the cool thing. Like that's what I enjoy most about this job and what continuously gets me energized about this job is that I'm able to be in the room with some of the most like smart, like the smartest, most impressive, most powerful people in the world, right? CEOs of like Fortune 500 companies, right? Fortune 50 companies. And like not only being in the room with them and seeing how they think but they're actually asking for my input and my like recommendations and what I'm thinking about. And that I think is like really unique to McKinsey that like others don't have, right? I think like maybe I like make this real, right? Like good examples, like when I first joined the firm in 2021 during COVID, I think the first project I was put on was working with Moderna and helping them figure out how to get their mRNA vaccines for COVID into Asia, right? Into Japan and Korea, right? And like that was really like what we call like a McKinsey moment. Like I don't think you do that anywhere else, but like the fact that like I was able to help like coordinate with Moderna's head of Asia Pacific alongside like the like Japanese and Korean ministers of health and our like experts in Japan and on the West Coast and everything, like, and be able to like coordinate how can they get their vaccines into these countries at like the fastest way possible to like solve the COVID crisis. Like that is something that's like really, really cool, right? I think that just like happens way more frequently at McKinsey than anywhere else, right? Like helping like bring insulin prices down to $35. Like that was actually something that like we were involved in. And like I was in the room, right, when the CEO of like the first company decided that they were going to take insulin prices down to $35. And so it's like stuff like that that is like really impactful. That like was what energizes me and like what also sets up like our firm apart from everybody else.
Sounds good. Thank you so much.
Yep.
Oh, I think I can read out a question from the chat. So how different would you say the recruiting process is for summer internships versus full-time? Is there anything in particular that is expected out of full-time applicants versus intern applicants? And do you have any advice for people who might not have as much professional experience when applying to these full-time positions?
Yeah, I can take this one. So what I would say is that the answer is actually the interview process for interns, for full-time out of college, and for also experienced hires is actually all the same. You're getting asked the same exact questions and you're given cases that are around the same, right? So there's no difference in what we're looking for. We're always looking for the same thing. Now, like, obviously the stories you're telling, right, in the behavioral portion are going to be different, but we're still looking for, like, at the core of it, the same characteristics and skill sets and qualities. We're not competing against like experienced hires. Those are all like three separate, like, interviewing pipelines, but there is no like, well, I'll say is like there's no difference in like what you need to do in terms of preparation and in terms of what we're looking for across the three. So hopefully that answers your question, Tristan. Yeah.
I do want to be mindful of time, but if we have like one more question that someone wants to slide into the chat or ask live, we have time for that. All right, no worries. If not, I think we can go ahead and wrap up. Thank you guys all for tuning in today. We hope you able to learn something new and gain some clarity on the consulting space, maybe help guide your journeys. Once again, I want to thank Richie and Susan for coming on and sharing your experience and time. I know you guys are very busy, but thank you for sharing with the greater TYCon community. Our next webinar is going to be towards the end of April. We're going to be exploring college applications. So if there are any high schoolers on the call, honestly, I hope not, but if there are, definitely tune into that. And to keep yourselves up to date on other TYCon events happening, be sure to fill out our membership form and subscribe to the newsletter. I'll send out like a recap email with more information later today to everyone who RSVP'd. But yeah, if you guys have any additional questions, feedback, or ideas for future webinar topics, feel free to reach out to me. And thank you guys again so much for tuning in. I appreciate it.
All right, thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Have a good one.